Hello, David Moore with Equity Advantage, 1031exchange.com, and I've got Robert Smith of Peregrine Private Capital here joining me today, and we're talking all things DST. So, the sky's falling. The world's upside down. The last year, it's so funny. One of our employees started just before the COVID lockdown. I said, we never had COVID before she was here, so I don't know. It's a different space. But if you think it's all Tina's fault. Don't blame Tina. But if you look at the world, and obviously different asset classes have been impacted differently in the last year. And if you look at you walked in this morning and we're in a 5-building office park and we're one of a half dozen companies on the bottom floor that are actually in a space. Everywhere around us it's empty. So obviously office has had a problem in the last year. Some retail has had a problem. Restaurants, how about the restaurant world? It's probably it's not a pretty situation. So when we look at one of the great things about DSTs and the companies you work with is you can literally pick the asset type you want, right? And so if we're looking at the different asset types and how they've been impacted by COVID and now potentially with this other economic turmoil going on, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've seen with the different assets you've been working with over the last year and where we're sort of headed with stuff?
Real good points, David. Even before COVID-19 and the attendant economic lockdown, two assets are actually the most conspicuous asset type under pressure was retail. Obviously, we have too much bricks and mortar retail for the digital age, and that was, again, apparent before COVID-19. All COVID-19 really did was hugely accelerate that process, exacerbate it, make it worse, and take probably a decade worth of movement to the virtual economy and condense it or collapse it down to 10 months. So COVID-19 has acted as a huge accelerant on the economy in terms of already existing trends, meaning retail was already under pressure from online retail, e-tailing, the internet, Amazon, and over the COVID-19 pandemic, that doubled. And so they guesstimate going forward that that will increase retail bankruptcies in both strip malls and large shopping malls by 300% over the next year or two. So retail is going to continue to have a hard time. The same thing's true of office. Office was already under pressure by working remotely, and that's been hugely accelerated by COVID-19 with people now being able, with working remotely now becoming the work type du jour, and so it's my opinion that when they finally do give us the all clear signal, and anybody with a brain in their head should know that COVID-19 it's over. Most of the red states are now functioning that way. There's still holdouts in blue states, but the pandemic is over. And so even when that is officially recognized, not all those people are going to go back to their cubicles, and not all those retail businesses are going to open back up. So what we've seen is a very rapid movement of institutional money away from retail and office towards what we call on our website habitational assets, meaning multifamily, self-storage, senior living, manufactured housing, anything associated with human habitation. And I don't think that flow of money will slow down or will abate because those trends are already in place. Obviously, all those retail properties and office properties aren't going to go away, but they're going to have to be repurposed. We're actually already, ironically enough, we're already seeing many big box retail properties being repurposed as last mile distribution centers for the very companies, Amazon, to a lesser extent FedEx and UPS, that have been putting retail businesses out of business. And we're actually seeing some of it converted to infill self-storage. Self-storage historically has been it's been the top performing commercial asset class in terms of total return the last 20 years. with a total return of in excess of 16%. It probably weathered COVID-19 better than any other asset type because you simply don't have any people. You just have their junk. And because your junk doesn't vote, you weren't subject to an eviction moratorium or rent control in the self-storage space like you have in multifamily. So those asset classes continue to be attractive, and to a certain extent they are capitalizing currently on vacant retail space. We guesstimate that the logical transition for redundant office space to go through will be commoditization in some way, shape, or form. Ultimately, that will be good for landlords because it'll fill them up. But the long and short of it is his rental income is lower than commercial office space, so all those properties are going to take a hit in terms of their cash flow. So those two property types have been most dramatically affected by COVID-19 and the fundamental shifts that occurred economically as a result of that. And those trends, in our opinion, are likely to stay in place in the near future. So we think habitational assets, as we already mentioned, will continue to benefit and outperform.
I'm just laughing because listening to you talk about the mini storage, and all I can think of is George Carlin with his routine on shit and stuff. It's like, people store, what are they storing in those mini storages, right? And the old joke is like you put $500 worth of stuff in the mini storage, and 10 years later, you've paid X dollars in storage fees for the $500 stuff in there. But hey, we love that, right? I mean, you don't have to deal with a whole bunch of stuff, and the whole storage, the storage wars or whatever that show is.
Hey, Americans love their stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, the great thing about self-storage, we think is an asset type, is the supply-demand equation still remains very healthy because it's getting pressured from both ends. Okay, young people still tend to be peripatetic. They go from place to place, job to job. If they're not CEO in 9 months, and that's got renting written all over it as opposed to ownership.
Yeah.
And like it or not, apartment footprints from a development standpoint are getting smaller every year. So there was never much storage in apartment properties to begin with, and so there's even less now. So they've got to have some place to store their stuff. And then people my age, empty nesters, downsizing, and God knows my kids don't want any of my junk, and I'm not dead yet, so I'm not going to sell it all like my wife wants me to. So I got to have some place to store my stuff. So that market segment or that asset type is getting pressured from both ends of the demographic spectrum because as Americans, we love our stuff.
Well, and rent control's not hitting that yet, right?
No.
But I mean, it's even the mobile homes. So I mean, there's legislation right now that would prohibit people from bumping the rents to market rate in between tenants. They want to actually, these rent control advocates want the previous tenant to fill out paperwork disclosing what they were renting things for so they can lock down what the increase. And I got a buddy in here that came in the other day he had mobile home RV parks. And he was talking same legislation's coming down for those. So even though he gave the example of a senior woman that's been living in his park for decades, and he didn't, he wanted her to build age in place, so he was doing the humane thing and keeping rents at a level where she can stay. And now he's being told that if she moves out, he's not even able to take that park, even though he takes that house, gets rid of it, puts a new one in place to bring it to current market. So the storage facilities, we don't have those issues to deal with. So that's a nice thing. One other comment I guess I'd say is, you talked about office space, or I brought it up and you talked about it. Imagine the people living at home right now or working from home right now, and they just finished the tax season. I mean, all the tax people are all on vacation because they've had a longer tax season than historically, and now they're working out of their home, and so somebody says, "Gee, you ought to take that home office and treat it as a home office." Therefore, it's now being converted into investment property. So if you've done that for more than 3 out of the last 5 years, now you got to exchange out of it. I would suggest that when you go to sell your home, and there's reason to do this, you think about at the very top, we talked about the 250 or 500 exclusion, what that covers today. But there's lots of times where we might want to say, your gains are so far beyond the 250 or 500 on the sale of your residence, let's treat a piece of that home as an investment property, and that DST would be the perfect place to throw some money. So with that said, is there a floor? And we'll sort of wrap up with this. We've established that it's, you name the asset class, you can get into it. We've discussed the process. It's an easy process. The hard work sort of falls on your shoulders to educate and teach them what's out there and let them decide. But as far as their pathway into one of your assets, it's pretty darn quick. But is there a floor to what you will accommodate or a ceiling to what you'll accommodate as far as cash coming in, equity coming in?
Every PPM, private placement memorandum associated with a DST property offering comes with a recommended minimum of $100,000 for 1031 exchange and a recommended minimum of $25,000 for a straight cash investment into that DST.
So 25 for just cash?
25 for that, just cash. That being said, most DST property providers are pretty flexible. So as long as there is equity remaining in that program for subscription purposes, they'll slice it and dice it in whatever way is convenient, as long as it's reasonable for investors. So they're pretty easy to get into that way.
Great. So we've been blessed to have Robert Smith with Peregrine Private Capital here today. I'm David Moore with Equity Advantage, 1031exchange.com. Robert, why don't you tell them how to get a hold of you and sign off for us today? Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having it, David. Our website is Peregrine, as in a peregrine falcon, peregrineprivatecapital.com. And at the top of our homepage, there's a little Learn More bar. And if you hit that,
Smash that Learn bar.
Blogs will drop down. And I think we do a very, very good job blogging about what's been happening with regard to commercial real estate from a property type standpoint and in terms of external economic forces which will drive supply and demand in the future. And I think that's a good way to begin educating yourself at peregrineprivatecapital.com, or just pick up the phone and give us a call at 503-241-4949.
Okay, I lied. I'm going to add one more thing. I said you'd wrap it up. I'm not going to let it wrap. I'm going to throw a bomb. Basically, Bob is a tremendous student of history. All right, so I just want to leave you with the fact that he worked very hard at what he does. He's very good at it, and he really applies a historical perspective to stuff. If those who don't study the history
doomed to repeat it,
condemned to repeat it. Right. So I just want to leave you with that. Any investment, tax deferral is only as good as the investment. Why defer into something that you end up losing? So it's really important, especially in times that markets were frothy right now. It's really important to understand what's out there. Take advantage of the resources that you've got available to you. It's a complicated world. If you've got questions on DST, please give Bob a call. And we look forward to any questions or concerns you may have, whether you're working with us or with somebody else. Don't hesitate to reach out. I always say the only dumb question is the one that's not asked. Thank you very much, Bob, for being here. Once again, Robert Smith, Peregrine Private Capital, and David Moore, 1031exchange.com. Thank you.
Thank you, David.